So Francis, you want to go ahead and start?
All right, let me start. Hi, my name is Francis Peron. I've been working with TED probably 10 years now. I was based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and in China as well, different locations. I'm now in Auburn, Alabama. Still working forward to developing the TI concept.
Okay.
Also, I'm a marketing international business.
Okay, thanks, Francis. Akiko?
Okay, hi, hello. So I'm attending from Japan, and I have 6 classes a week, and the classes will be starting on the second week of May. So I feel so nervous. So this is the first time to use the online lessons. So I decided to join this program. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right, Robert?
Hi, I'm Robert Sanderson, or Bob. Based in Osaka. I teach at 3 universities here. Each one has a different system, and I'll have 13 classes this semester. Starting, one school has already started, and the others are starting in about another week or so.
Okay. And which one of the 5 keys would you like to get out of this class?
I don't see keys. What keys?
Yeah, well, the article that I think Richard sent you the information. The article.
I skimmed over that. I'm just waking up here and don't have it in my head at the moment. So.
Okay. All right. Yeah. If you think of anything, just let me know.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. Let's see, Michael.
Parrish. I'm also based in Japan. I'm at Kansei Gakuin University, and I'm just trying to find the right mix between online interaction and doing assignments. Just finding the right balance with online learning.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, Zane.
Hi, I'm Zane Ritchie, originally from New Zealand. I'm also teaching in Japan, in just outside Tokyo, in a place called Saitama at Josai University. I also have part-time work at 2 other places, and I got out of Tokyo. I foresaw where it was going, so I'm back in Kyoto. I have a house in Kyoto, so of course we'll be doing our semester entirely online. So Richard forwarded me the article, and I'd like to challenge it actually. So
great.
Very nice.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Will.
Hey everyone, my name is Will Quisenberry. I'm out of the U.S. I'm in Lexington, Kentucky. I've been with a few different universities. Currently, I'm with Purdue University Global, and then the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. And I've worked with TED on several projects and with a few different institutions as well. And so I'm just looking to get a bit more tips and clues on how we could keep learners engaged, and also ensuring that they actually walk away from the classroom with practical knowledge. So making the courses as practical as possible, but also not doing away with good concepts and theoretical frameworks. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. All right, Elizabeth.
Hi, good morning. I'm Elizabeth, and I'm originally from Canada and Europe, a kind of mix, and I'm living in Japan currently. I teach at Konan University. We started this remote teaching, as some people are calling it, 2 weeks ago. So I just finished my 2nd week. Things are going okay so far, but I just need to learn more about, so that we can assign different kinds of homework assignments and things like that. one of the classes I'm in charge of is speech and discussion. So we're looking at different ways that we can have the students do their speeches in front of the class as they would in the classroom, but we're not really sure how to do that. So we're looking at different ways of that, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, two. Two, go ahead and unmute your mic. Yeah, I'll unmute you. Yeah. Go ahead, two. Yeah, two, your microphone's unmuted. Go ahead and speak.
Hello, everybody. I'm from Mongolia. I'm working at a Faculty Development Center, Mongolian University Science and Technology. Thank you, Ted, for this online course.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you again. Thank you. Good to see you again.
Yeah, thank you. See you again.
Yeah. All right, Richard. Richard.
Maybe mic issues.
Maybe he's unmuted. No. Okay, we'll see if he comes down. All right, Uday or Uday. I pronounced that correctly?
Excuse me?
Yes.
Richard Miller just sent me a message in the chat box that he's having a mic issue.
Okay. All right.
I'll talk him through that if you like. While you guys carry on.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So now that we've got, did I miss anybody? I think I've gotten everybody on here.
Francis Piron.
Yeah. No, we got Francis was the first one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right. So here's a quick overview of what we're going to kind of talk about. First, we're going to look at the epistemological perspective of learning. So redefine learning a little bit rather than the generic concepts that most people tend to use. And then we'll look at learning as a process or a system. And then we'll kind of talk about the online environment, what are some of the specific challenges that you already know or you're facing and what can we do about it. And then we'll go to discussing some of the keys to engagement. And then we'll kind of look at a different way of looking at how do you do lesson planning and a process for doing that, okay? So let's start with the learning aspect. What is learning? How do you define learning? You know, as educators, we all have that idea in our mind, this is our job, but what is it really? How do you define learning? Go ahead, any of you can feel free to speak. If you have smaller from the group.
I would say that learning occurs when there is some form of change that has happened. Change in the way we think, the way we do things, the way we solve problems. Or either there's a step in that direction. I would say that's when learning occurs. And secondly, as I look at the first key, I would say that for learning to occur, there's got to be some proper storage in long-term memory after the processing in the short-term memory. So as you're learning, again, it's two components. That some change, some form of change has occurred, and secondly, there should be an ability or to recall the information that has been learned.
Yeah, great. Good to see that you incorporate the long-term and short-term aspects of this part. Any other thoughts on learning? How you define learning? Zhang, I see you moving. Unmute yourself real quick. Yeah, go ahead, Zane.
Yeah, just increasing your knowledge, I think. It's simple answer.
Okay, how do you do that?
By expanding your horizons, reading widely, getting out and about, attending lectures.
Okay. So, I posted a couple of questions in here. When it comes to learning, the one key aspect to always keep in mind, how much will the human brain retain, and how does the human brain take that information and make it into knowledge and be able to use it? Okay. So, everything we talk about within the context of this workshop will focus on how the human brain learns and are able to maintain that knowledge in your mind and not just have it as information coming in and information coming out. One of the worst things as educators is that when we teach our students, 2 months later, they have no idea what we taught them, right? That's the most embarrassing aspect of being an educator. If your students don't remember what you teach them, are they really learning? All the short-term regurgitation stuff isn't necessarily learning. Okay, so we're gonna look at learning from that perspective for the purpose of this workshop. All right. So something that the definition from educational psychology always looks at learning is a relative permanent change. So it's not just something that changed, but has to be something that's relatively permanent. Okay, so how do we get that permanence going within the human brain? And that becomes the biggest challenge for educators. Right. So when we look at learning, so we're going to look at 3 different aspects. First, the information, then the knowledge, then the skill. Okay. Now, information is just data, right? We're throwing textbooks at students, articles, our lectures, our presentations, all of that stuff is just information. Now, what do you need in order for that piece of information to become knowledge? Any guesses?
You have to be able to adapt it. You have to be able to use it.
No, it should be a couple of simple words.
Application.
Yeah, I was going to say an opportunity to apply it.
Okay, the application side. And then when you apply it, what do you get?
Information plus understanding.
I would say understanding.
Some good understanding of it. Okay, so the understanding side is still the intellectual aspect, the analytical intelligence part. The one thing to keep in mind that in order for information to be remembered, there has to be an emotional content piece attached to it. Okay, if there's no emotion attached to it, our retention will be relatively limited. But if we attach a very solid piece of emotion to it, we'll remember it more, right? You can think of all the different dramatic events that happen in life, including this pandemic. We'll remember a lot more about this pandemic than any other event because there's a lot of emotions attached to it. Okay? Anything we learn, in order for it to be retained in the long run, think about the emotional attachment to any piece of information. Okay? Now, the context of learning has to deal with the how, the who, the process, and the system, right? Now, when you look at the two, I've kind of put 2 different things on there. Which one's a system, which one's a process? Is a circle? How many of you think, just raise your hand that for those I can see. How many of you think that the circle is a system or a process? How many of you think it's a system? Raise your hand.
I would say it can be both, actually, I would say.
Okay, so what's the difference between a system and a process, Francis?
I was afraid you might ask me that question. Well, okay, a process, I wouldn't that's why I see a lot of similarities between the two. In a process, I would expect something happening from one step to another, to a third, etc., which the circle intimates that. Perhaps a system would incorporate more environments, more variables, more issues. Again, I would see the process as being a process being steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a system would be how those 5 steps operate within other variables that would be necessary for the whole thing to work. That's the way I think about it.
Okay, so in your explanation, the second diagram with the step 1, 2, 3 is a process, right?
Yeah, correct. Well, as well as in, well, yeah, maybe the circle is not anymore because the circle keeps going. There's no end. Yeah, so steps 1, 2, 3, that's the process for me.
Right, yep, exactly. So when we look at these two diagrams here, the circle represents a system, which is as a continuous loop. It learns from itself, it corrects itself. There's an entire list of items that happen in an enclosed environment where we can create sustainable change within that entire cycle that goes on and on and on. Where a process is a multiple step process, one step at a time, and there's always some type of endpoint. It doesn't mean it's always gonna, the last step is always going to go back to the first step or second step. Okay, so in the context of learning, when we look at learning, we have to look at learning as a system, right? Now, looking at learning as a system, this is a integrative learning spiral that I created in my first book. At the very bottom, you have what's called tacit knowledge. This is what we know about ourselves, our favorite colors, what we think knowledge is, what we think learning is, who our favorite teachers are, our favorite students. And then on the side, there's explicit knowledge. Okay? Explicit knowledge is the textbooks. Explicit knowledge are things that can be transferred. So videos on YouTube is a form of explicit knowledge. These are things that can be passed along to people, right? And then at the very top of this system, there's systems for teaching. So systems are multidimensional. So there are smaller systems within larger systems, right? It adds on layers and layers of this. So there's system of an individual in intelligences. And then once you go beyond the system of individuals, there's systems of teams, classes, universities. Those are larger systems, and even a country is a huge system to look at. Okay, so at the very top is a system of teaching. So this is the process where the explicit knowledge gets transferred into some other entity, like a student, right? Now, on the far right-hand side is where the application knowledge happens. Some of you talked about the application of knowledge earlier, and then form of translating that information into knowledge. The application has to be there. So when we look at it, the application is where the piece personal meaning gets involved. If people apply it to their own lives, it becomes much more meaningful, all right? And then when they apply it, the meaningful emotions gets attached to that piece of information. And then this is where tacit knowledge gets created at the very bottom. So there has to be a system of learning inside the university system, inside any educational system. Okay. Now, let's play with some simple variables, as Francis talked about the variables. So let's take tacit knowledge as X. Okay. Now, when we move this across, we have typically Y as the books, articles, case studies, and so on, right? In the traditional educational model, mostly it's I'm the professor, I'm the teacher, and I'm going to give you that Y. Here's your textbook, here's your cases, go read it, go study it, and give me some assessments back, give me a test back. In the online environment, you have to start looking at combining X and Y, which means I have to know a little bit about my students, what their learning modalities are, some of the things I talked about in the article, what their favorite colors are, or what their major challenges facing themselves as far as how their career is going to progress. Some of those things you can implicate or implement into the classrooms, right? When you come to application, the application has to be about application of X and Y. If you just tell students to do cases by itself, then it's going to have limited emotional content, which means they won't remember it as well as if you give them something that has personal meaning. Okay, so this whole entire spiral has to have some type of a quantifiable, meaningful impact, right? And this is where the fun aspects of education becomes much more interesting, when we can measure how these students have applied it in their life and challenge them to go and create that personal meaning from everything that they learn from us. Okay, so this is the integrative learning spiral, which is some of the foundations of the article that's not necessarily discussed in the articles because this takes a lot more time to discuss. So any questions on this model?
Well, just a very simple question. I don't see implicit knowledge. I know that it should, I believe it should be somewhere here. It's not exactly the same as tacit knowledge. Implicit knowledge, if I recall correctly, is the one that's kind of difficult to explain. Those are the assumptions that we have. I mean, maybe the cultural understanding that we share among people of a similar culture that don't need to be explained, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So everything about culture, yeah, there's a lot of assumptions in one's tacit knowledge. Your beliefs, your values, all of that is part of your tacit knowledge. Okay. So the tacit knowledge encompasses a lot of what you think you know, also what you think you don't know, or what you don't know that you don't know. Okay, all your underlying assumptions and beliefs about race, about color, about your however your president's handling the pandemic, all those assumptions are inside the tacit knowledge area.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Okay. I think on the chat, so we'll go ahead and ask you a question so everybody can hear it.
Yeah, sure. I just didn't want to interrupt, but I was just curious if you can elaborate on where the emotional component comes in to play at, or can you provide an example of what that may look like in the learning process?
Yeah, the emotion is the key aspect to making everything real, right? So when you're up here at the very top with a system of teaching and so forth, you're modifying how you teach to what they're learning. So let's take, for example, a very simple concept. You've all had communication classes, right? Everybody teaches communication, understands communication. So if I'm teaching communication, let's say how to, we'll use Socratic methods, how to ask the right questions, right? We'll ask the students to go back into their homes, to their best friends, to their clubs and sports, and start using questions more often, and just start counting how many questions they use, right? And see what type of responses they get, and teach them how to use open-ended questions and close-ended questions in that process. And then part of quantifying the meaningful feedback is see if your friends like you more, see if you gain more respect. Okay, those are the fun elements that makes learning really interesting. When they can apply it to their own personal relationships, and if they're improving their relationships, they're really going to attach to that piece of knowledge that you're sharing with them. That's the emotional content.
So it's kind of like making it real, making it applicable, relevant to their world.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions? No. Okay. All right. So, so what I've colored here in the yellow area, this is the key pieces that it's up to the educators to kind of integrate into your online platforms. Okay. So, and then as you can see, the two pieces in the red here, the books and the sharing of that, that's traditionally in the traditional education environment in the classrooms. It's a little bit easier to do that. Where in the online environment, the big shaded area in the yellow becomes significantly more important. And that's how we make the biggest impact. All right, so when we look at the online environment, there's going to be a lot of different challenges that we've not really faced in the typical lecture environment when people come to class. The first one is your physical presence, right? We can easily take attendance with various technology, just like having a roll call and so forth. The physical presence can be there. But as you can see, even when we have a bunch of educators, not everybody turns on the camera at just a name. Does that mean, are they really listening? Or are they really actually physically present to their class and what you're teaching, right? The second part here is the mental presence. That's probably one of the biggest challenges in education as you're engaging with people. You want people to be mentally present, not just physically present. How do you assess mental presence in an online environment, right? Where does that come from? What are some tools to kind of go ahead and engage some of that and assess whether people are listening or not? And this is where different types of polling, if I can add a message into the classroom and the chat, general chat, say, hey, everybody respond to this. Or I can say, hey, Michael, I see you're looking down. What do you think about this, right? Those that you can see, you can get people to check in using various tools to make sure the mental aspects are there. Okay. Now, the distractions of students are countless, right? We all know in class, when you're sitting in front of them, the students are maybe playing on their phone and stuff. At least they're hiding it, right? In an online classroom, you have no idea what they're actually doing. You know, I've surveyed a whole bunch of different university students, and it's amazing. I mean, my article starts well off with while I was sleeping, while I was watching TV, or I was playing a game. You know, students are engaged in so many different distractions when they're in the online environment, which is why it becomes even more important for us educators to make sure that the learning is so meaningful to them that they're eager to learn. They're excited to get in the classroom. They're excited to hear their name being called. They're excited to apply some of these things and make it a lot more fun, right? So this is why the emotional intelligence aspect, and I'm incorporating here, has to be extremely, extremely important. So, you know, we talked about the personal meaning aspects of it, making sure whatever you teach them, there's some piece of personal meaning to it. And then the final dimension of emotional intelligence is what's called emotional alchemy. And that's the ability to create that desired emotional state within a group, right? So if you're running a class, have you thought about what emotional state you want the class to be in order for them to learn the most? What is that emotional state? Okay, it cannot be boredom, right? You can't stress them out in some type of negative emotional state. Can you create a state of inspiration? Can you create a state of curiosity, right? Think about the class you're going to teach the next time, and then write down a specific emotion you want the class to feel, and then design the starting of the class, and as well as various activities to be within that emotion. So students will feel it, you will inspire that emotion to come out. Okay, and then of course, to do all of that, you kind of have to kind of start looking at educational psychology a little bit. There are tons of studies out there on how to engage students in different ways that I can't even begin to kind of cover all of these things. Okay, so these are some of the things to kind of keep in mind as you're looking at this, right? Now, so I'm just gonna go ahead and go into each one of the 5 keys that we talked about in the article. And then if you have any specific questions, we only have enough time to kind of cover them somewhat in depth, but not too much. If you have any questions on how to apply it, feel free to stop me and ask. Ideally, each one of these keys that I've mentioned here that you can actually use in your very next class, okay? All right, so the first one is the whole 18-minute mark, right? You've all seen TED videos. 18 minutes is the golden number that most of them comply to. 18 minutes, 15 minutes, anywhere along those things. This is part of human reality in your mind, okay? If we go too long, you're gonna forget about it, right? So even think of some of the basic things like what countries were present when we did the introductions. Can anybody remember all the countries that was in the introductions?
Japan, Malaysia,
Japan.
the US.
Canada.
Mongolia.
See, now you're working as a team,
Yeah.
right?
Alabama, not independent yet.
So now, this may be a fun question at the beginning, even though it's only been, let's see, how many minutes has this been? It's not even, we're even in the close 20-minute mark, and it's hard to remember. It's just simple countries that the introductions included. You know, so the human brain isn't really wired to sit and listen and remember all this stuff, right? Our auditory senses are not that keen in memorization, okay? Anything past beyond, anything without that emotional attachment. So when you think about how to make sure the students remember it, in that 18 minutes, find something that's emotionally engaging, okay? Figure out what kind of stories you can use to make it so that students are gonna say, wow, I wanna remember this point.
My wallet.
I'm sorry, what was that?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, Francis, you muted yourself. Oh. Okay, so let's kind of take an example, okay? Any one of you give me a class topic you're going to teach?
Informative speeches.
Informative speeches. Okay, great. Thank you, Elizabeth. All right.
3 minutes,
Informative.
3 minutes long.
Okay, so you're teaching.
Yeah,
ahead.
informative speeches about 3 minutes long about introducing their hometown or another city that they want to talk about.
Okay, great. So now, what would you do with your lecture so that you make your lecture very concise and teach them how to go about doing that?
What we've done, they have a textbook that we kind of have to follow. And the textbook has a video where there's an example of somebody giving the informative speech. So they have to sort of make their own speech and introduce either their hometown or a city that they traveled to that they really liked, and do it sort of following the pattern that the example already gave.
Okay, so that's the class activity. What are you going to do in your class? So are you giving a lecture on this at all? Is there a real-time conversation with the students on this?
With each individual student?
No, just like what we have now, just like holding a virtual class.
So what we did they watched the video for homework, and then in class we just talked about, I went over like, okay, what did she do before the speech? She made a chart of all the information, and how many points did she write in her chart, and how many points did she actually present? Like she chose a few points, and then so we talked about what she had done, and then I said, okay, now you're going to do the same thing. First, you're going to make a chart like she did on page 17. And so that's your homework for next week, is to make the chart of what you want to talk about. And then I looked at the charts, and then now their homework for the next class is to prepare the PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha. Interesting. All right. So you're basically following the textbook and how to guide them through the assignments, right?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay. So an idea I'll throw out at you. When students are learning these kind of things, and if they're following the textbook, they're following the textbook's directions or your directions, the amount of personal meaning is relatively limited. Okay. Now, you could easily have some fun with this by having a couple of students do an informal speech. Just come up and do it, right? And then show the class exactly why, and then actually you can do a little competition to see who's the most memorable, okay? And then you can look at why those people that wasn't very memorable and why that was memorable, so that those people can get personally involved in this, right? And then you can do a simulation of, I don't know what age group you're working with, but you can either do a simulation of getting hired, okay? Getting hired by your perfect job with a 3-minute informal conversation, and then task them to go do that. And that'll give them a lot more personal meaning, because at some point, these students, I'm assuming undergraduate, graduate, any student is going to go do a job interview, right? They'll have to have those skills. That becomes extremely important for them to get the job that they want. Now, the topic becomes much more meaningful in a personal way.
Yeah, interesting.
All right. So this is the emotional attachment part, where we all have things we have to follow. We all have curriculums and lesson topics. But how do we make it so that each one of these topics is more emotionally engaging for them? Okay, that's going to be the key in all of your lectures. So you can easily, in a perfect little story, when you talk about this in 18 minutes or less in your lecture, you can easily say, okay, here's John Doe, went into an interview, had great resume, had great qualifications, did not get the job. Why? And then go on discussing something that's relevant. Give them a story that's relevant to them. Okay. Okay. Now, part of this is also having to do with your personal efficiency in lesson planning. The one key that I see a lot of educators do in different parts of the world, they spend too much time preparing content in their lesson. So they have to talk for an hour or 45 minutes. All that talking, all the PowerPoints is so much work. right? Here in this environment here, when we talk about the online learning and keeping it short, small segments with activities is a little bit less work in content of materials and presentations and slides and your lectures and so forth. But the materials become much more creative in a way, right? So you're not spending as much time preparing long lectures as opposed to preparing activities that are meaningful. And all you have to do is come up with 1 or 2 meaningful stories or 1 or 2 engagement activities so that the students really attach to whatever they're learning from you and they want to come and learn. Not just, oh, I have to go to class, I have to follow this textbook and listen to this professor talk for an hour and I'm going to forget it by the end of the month anyways. So, you know, we don't want to fall into that trap. Okay, so think about your own efficiency in lesson planning, and then I would recommend you start tracking that. The minute we are human brains, the minute we start tracking something, this minute we push ourselves to be more efficient, right? So you can just easily put down, okay, I'm starting at 12:01, planning this lesson. Let's see how long it takes me to plan out 1 hour of class. And then keep tracking that and make sure that it's more and more efficient. The efficiency factor on your time is also a huge benefit for you. And, you know, I'm sure your universities, however much they pay you, you want to maximize your money per hour, right? So that's something else to kind of think about. Okay, so there's benefits on both sides and having this practice of keeping short segments of lectures. Okay, okay, any questions on this slide? Nope. Okay, all right, so moving on. The second key in the article was all about the meaningful. Okay, now this is something that I've not seen too many universities do as a system, as a process of learning, is capture some of these key aspects. So down here I put, you know, core values, personal interests, career goals, and then current learning, current perspectives such as their life in the pandemic. You know, the first 3 items here ideally should be captured when the students start their programs. Okay, in our university we always make sure that, you know, the core values are captured up front, goals and so forth. All this data is captured up front, so there is a student inventory of some type, right? And then when we go through the different courses, all these different parts and pieces can come out and really start using it where it's appropriate. So whatever topics you're choosing, you can make it meaningful because you know what the student's background is. If you have no idea who the students are, and you know, like in the old days of teaching, you know, we get a roster, and I'm hoping that you get a little bit more than just a roster of your students at this point, that you know a little bit about the students. Or if you don't, simply have an icebreaker session in the first class and find out these parts, right? Have people go through, all right, write down your top 5 values. You know, when I go to China to teach, for example, you know, I don't have any of this information. So one of the first activities is write down your top 5 values, right? So I get to know who they are, and then I use the values to hold them accountable to various activities that I'm doing in the class. So having these information, your learning, your design of the course can be a lot more fun as well. Okay. So just do a quick poll here. Who here has a student inventory of some type? Does anybody have a student inventory?
Not for every class, for one class.
I'm sorry, say that again, Michael?
Not for every class, but for one of my business classes, I have an inventory.
Okay, excellent.
So sorry, Tid, what do you mean student inventory? Do you mean like a list of the students in your class?
No, that's a student roster. Student inventory is knowing a lot more personal things about them. So what their core values are, what their personal interests, their career goals.
I think that one way you can do that I use quite frequently is intros. So intros at the beginning of the class. And so you can ask questions. And I'm speaking about an online course. I know everyone here doesn't always teach online, but you know, if you have an intro question, then you can ask the questions that you're interested in, like their core values, their interests, what they do, what they're interested in. And then I refer back to that. Because one problem that I have, Ted, and maybe you can help with this, I offer any recommendations, is universities, they have such huge classes anymore. So it's very difficult to build those in-depth relationships with every single student, you know, when your course is just jam-packed. So do you have any recommendations how you can still capture some of these more in-depth relationships or opportunities to build more personable learning experiences with very large classes, like many universities are doing anymore?
Yeah, this is where technologies can really jump in and take care of things quite a bit. You know, even with core values, I had a professor one time challenge me that you can't capture core values of all the students. And I said, sure I can, why not? And then we went and created a global study around it with a lot of universities involved. And we captured, you know, thousands of students with their top core values. And it was a simple web survey that captured that information and then pulls the information out and gave you the demographics of the class, right? So if I'm taking a class of 200-300, whatever the number, that could be 10,000 students, the technology can easily say, okay, class, go take this core values assessment. And then the system will spit me out. It's okay, here's your top 25% of these valued family, 40% of your class valued achievement. You know, you can get a demographics using technology pretty quickly. And even if you don't, you can easily create your own polls. You know, this is where you, in the online environment, you get a little bit creative and start doing threads and ask questions that are very close-ended. If you ask open-ended questions, it's almost impossible to do numerical analysis when you have large classes, right? So just do a strategic post where students have to respond, but their responses are very close-ended. So that way you can pull the responses out very quickly, put it into an Excel sheet or, you know, SPSS, whatever software you want to use, and do some very basic analysis on it.
Okay, thanks so much. What about making the course material specific to what they're interested in their career paths, et cetera? When you have such large classes, it's kind of difficult to walk alongside each individual student, right?
Mm-hmm. Right, and that's where you start pulling the demographics data that you get. So let's say, you know, 25% of your students want to become doctors, right? And then you start tailoring some parts of the content towards the medical field. And then you may have other 30% that want to become engineers, and you can tailor some parts of your lectures to that. You know, so the initial information gathering and the availability of that information is what you would use every time you plan a lesson or plan that particular week. And you start pulling that information and then connecting it so that by the end of the course, every student should be able to feel that, yes, my professor was talking to me about my interests.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot.
Yep.
Quick question, Ted. Within the U.S. environment, I was thinking about core values and personal interest. Would it be could there be a legal challenge?
I'm sorry, say that again, Francis. Would there be a what?
Within a U.S. environment, asking students about surveying them even about core values and personal interests, especially personal interests. I'm wondering if there wouldn't be some legal issues there.
Nope, not that I'm aware of. I've done this with many classes in the U.S. and different parts of the world. You know, as long as you're not using the information to do marketing on them or to give it to anybody else, it's intended for learning purposes. Most universities and most parts of the world will very much welcome and accept that part.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So, you know, so the fun part here is, of course, your own creativity and your own ability to understand the student's needs and then connect whatever you're teaching and then give it to them in a way that they will connect to it. Okay. All right. So moving on to the next one. Now, the next one is the whole modalities piece. So the learning modalities, there's many different parts of literature on this. Learning modalities are a key aspect to this. And I always have a lot of fun with different teachers that I meet, whether it's in the airport or at any social event. And I ask them, you know, what are the modalities of your student body? And this is where the statistics come in very easily. And there's only 3 primary modalities, right? So you can break up your 100% of your students and what percentage of your students are visual, kinesthetic, and auditory. If teachers knew that, then they can take that information. Let's say the majority is, you know, visual. Now I can take more of my content and design it in such a way that I'm delivering more visual content and more kinesthetic content, right? So it goes back to how you're designing the class. So when we design the class, and we'll see the step later on. So I kind of did a little hint down here in step 4 in lesson planning process is figuring out what modality the students are, and then using that modality to deliver the information so it becomes more easily remembered, okay? And this all goes back to how much people will remember, right? When you think about your best friends, people that you really understand and connect, those people are more likely to have the same learning modality as you, okay? Now, when we look at the modalities, how many of you know the modalities of your students or have assessed them? No? Oh, I see Zane raising your hand. Zane? Wait, unmute yourself there.
Sorry, that's been raised for some time, I think.
Oh, okay.
So I have an issue with it being all in Japanese for some reason when I restarted Zoom this morning. So
Okay.
I can't find in the Japanese version, I can't find that mark to get rid of the hand.
Yeah.
Is that it? Oh,
Yeah,
it's gone. There
Okay.
it is.
All right.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
There you are.
Okay.
Sorry
All
about
right.
that.
That's all right. Yeah. So having a modality assessment of your students, and this is very easily available on many websites. You can tell the students just go take a modalities assessment and get the data back to you, and then you can do a modalities assessment, right? And then this is something that can be pretty fun for you to play around with as well. So in a live situation, if you're meeting someone for the first time, or if you're getting to know someone, can you guess their modality within the first 2 minutes of talking to them? Okay. Have you ever anybody play with that skill? No? Okay, so let's have a little bit of practice here. Paul. So Paul, I'm going to unmute you. Tell me about today's weather.
The weather today is sunny, warm, say 75 Fahrenheit. Couple clouds here or there, but mainly sunny.
Okay, can anybody guess what modality he is primarily from this piece of data?
Maybe visual, a little bit visual.
Yeah, I would say visual.
Yeah. So in the words that he used, the first word is sunny, right? That's definitely a visual word. The second word he used was warm. Warm is more kinesthetic, which is a feeling. And then he talked about having a few clouds, which is also visual, right? So the majority of his words he used is more visual, where a kinesthetic person would talk about feeling words, more like warm, okay? So in a very quick conversation, this is all data points, right? Nothing is conclusive at this point. So you can start guessing what modalities people are, okay? When you look at the backgrounds of people, or when you look at somebody's desk, people that are more visual, their desk will typically be pretty neat. They will lay their phones down in a very symmetrical way next to their notebook, and everything's parallel to each other. Those are the extreme visual people. People that are kinesthetic tend to have messy desks. They'd like to move things around, right? So very quickly you can assess what modalities people are. So when I go to a meeting, I consult with all my executives in this way. I said, okay, do a visual modality diagram on your piece of paper. When people sit down at any meeting, just draw out a little square, right? And then just jot down this person's visual, this person's kinesthetic, and so on, and get a visual diagram of the modalities of all the people in the room. And then when you need to speak to that certain person, then you want something from them, use their modality. That becomes much more effective in communication. And teaching is pretty much the same thing, right? If you want your students to learn a lot from you, then speak in the modality that's most dominant for them. That'll get them to really like you to start with, okay? And then also helps them remember that information, because otherwise if you keep on doing auditory, by the way, auditory is the lowest percentage out of the three in general public, okay? Our human brain is not wired to remember everything we hear, which is why we have to be able to see it. We have to do stuff to remember it, and then seeing it is also another right brain function, okay? It's on the same side as long-term memory and emotions, okay? All right, so moving on to the next one. So now we talk a little bit about the designing of the activities. So something that I always throw out at people, I know a lot of universities tend to use case studies. Case studies are a little bit challenging. You know, just like the example that Elizabeth gave us with the informal conversations or informal presentations, whenever we use those type of activities that are not, the textbook doesn't know anything about the students, it doesn't care, it's just a piece of data, right? Same as a case study. Somebody wrote it at one point, it's about a company, here you go for the students. But how is that meaningful for the students? Okay, now to make it meaningful, instead of using a generic case study, you can easily say to the students, all right, go to this pizza shop or go to this sushi shop on this corner, on this street, and go talk to the entrepreneur, go talk to the manager, find the case, go determine the case that's whatever you're teaching, right? If you're teaching about communication, ask them about communication problems. If you're teaching about finance, business, whatever, engineering, you can always find a local business in your neighborhood and have them go create that case, right? That becomes much more meaningful for students to engage on something that they have a face and a place to go to and see the impact, as opposed to just a piece of paper on that textbook or somebody gave you, okay? That becomes a lot more fun and an engaging activity. That becomes meaningful. When I first started doing this, this was 2007 at one of the universities, and basically another fellow professor said, you can't do this. No students are going to go out and ask an entrepreneur, and it's an entrepreneurship class, no students are going to ask an entrepreneur or go out and ask them what their problem is, and no entrepreneur is going to tell you to their face. I'm like, really? Okay, let's see it, right? And then by the end of class, I had 2 entrepreneurs that was owning their business sign up for the program because they saw the students went out and asked them, and then I challenged them to give solutions. In the whole class, it was all about being the consultant. You play the role of a consultant and helps that entrepreneur solve their problems, right? And then when they went back and gave them the papers, those 2 entrepreneurs really loved it, and they signed up for the MBA program right before the class ended. Okay, that's become so much more meaningful, right? So you have to kind of break outside the box a little bit and make it really meaningful and fun for these kids so that they're engaged in your class. And then they'll be your little champions running around the different parts of the world doing something that incorporates learning. And learning is not just in the classroom at this point, right? There's no classrooms now. It's just a virtual space. So why not get them to go out and do something that they learn and incorporate their community into the learning activity? Okay. So that's the hint on the first part of it with case studies. Make a real case study, have them assess it, and then have them provide a solution to whoever they're going to get in that problem from. That'll make learning a lot more fun and meaningful. Okay. Any questions on that part? Can you all do this with your classes, whatever topics you're teaching?
I'm doing exactly that in one class, where students are thinking about career English, and they have to interview someone who's in the field that they want to explore, and find out real life. Yeah, great. Now,
sorry, Ted. I also did this in all my classes, exactly what you're describing. So it's not. Been doing it for years, and I just tell you it works a lot. Like community projects, like getting them out there, interviewing businesses, going out and exploring, coming back and reporting on it, and it made a huge difference actually. It's a lot less work for me as well. And in fact, I spend little time in the classroom at my university, so I'm known for getting them out into the community and going out with them, trying out bicycle sharing. The bicycle sharing system, for example. So instead of studying it from just on paper, we go and we try it. They come out, they go and report on it, and see how efficient it is. See how to learn how to use it. Yeah. So I did that a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So Michael, one thought for you.
Sorry. Can I just add? So right now we're supposed to be kind of quarantined, so it makes it more difficult to send the students out to talk to people in the neighborhood.
But the technology is, just like how you came to me in this little workshop, the technology is there for them to push their boundaries. The students currently have more social media awareness than we do, right? They have tons of different tools and new apps out there that can reach out and touch someone, right? we just simply challenge the students, hey, you can't physically go out, still go out and meet somebody. There's so many different workshops, there's so many different community engagements. Like, you know, one of the groups that I belong to, it's a community nonprofit group. They're doing dance parties virtually. Okay, so, you know, a lot of people are coming up with very creative virtual ways to do things. You can just challenge your students, go make a new best friend.
So
Right.
would
Yeah,
it, is it okay if they're conducting these case studies in their own native language and then coming back and reporting in English? Because like I'm in Japan, so the classes that I'm teaching are mostly like English classes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it depends on the experience you want to give them. So if the learning to speak in English is a specific skill in the class and then what are learning outcomes you want to assess, then definitely challenge them in speaking in English. But their engagement in the community may have a major limitation on that. If your focus is for them to learn to analyze and identify a problem and analyze a problem and present a solution that makes sense that those people will take on, then it's the analysis part. So whether they speak Japanese or any other language, it doesn't really matter, right? It really depends on what you want, what the key learning outcomes are for your class. Okay, so Michael, one thing I wanted to kind of follow up on your side is when you do once they do the interview, right? It's a one-point contact, right? How do you think you can get the students to further that relationship in that practice of English or other skills to continue on that relationship, so they learn a lot more over a longer period rather than one point of contact?
Well, perhaps they could, you know, follow up with the person as they go through their personal career journey. Follow up with the person. You know, I took this whatever accountant's test, the accounting test or whatever, and maybe the person recommended to take you need to take a basic accounting test to become a CPA, a bookkeeping exam, and I took this test and this is how I studied, or you know, hopefully they can make a mentoring, not just a one point, but a mentoring relationship.
Yeah, exactly. So creating that mentor relationship will strengthen many different skills that they will want, right? And then you can kind of help them, guide them along those lines. And things with mentoring, especially with an amount of lack of time a lot of executives have at the higher levels, you know, on the mentoring side, if you show people that you hear them for the students, then those people will give their time to the students, right? So you can easily train the students, say, okay, let's build trust in a very quick way. Now, how do I do that? At the end of that interview, however long that interview is, you end with one question. What could I do now to better my skills, better my career, what could I do now? And then that executive would give maybe one practical advice, right? And then now the student goes and does it, and then comes back and says, oh, I did that, and here's what I found out. That conversation will build a lot more trust and build that ongoing relationship, so that now it becomes, instead of a one-point interview, it becomes an ongoing relationship and building on trust over and over again.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, that makes it a lot of fun. Okay. All right. Now, I kind of want to talk a little bit about the divergent thinking aspects here a little bit. The whole concept of divergent thinking is taking things apart and then letting different thoughts and ideas come in to make this more rich. Just like how kind of Zane started off with, have some challenges for you, which is great, right? It's all part of that conversation and education. We don't want to be the sage on the stage. We don't want to be the ultimate knowledge knower that we give the students everything. It has to be a constructive process where they have to come up with their knowledge and then integrate it into the process. So the whole divergent thinking activity can be done in any classroom. You can easily say, put into the classroom, you all have discussion boards of some kind, or even a basic discussion. You can say, okay, the sky is purple. Why? Throw something out there and let people come in and say, okay, yeah, you know, reason why the sky is purple. And you can make it anything you want to make and just throw an idea out there, right? Or you can say, I'm handsome or I'm beautiful. Why? People just kind of toss their ideas in, whatever that concept is. And those are some of the simple examples, right? If you're teaching something about communications or whatever topic, you can put more complex ideas in there and let people bring in the ideas, okay? In that formation of idea, the one thing that online learning has over regular classroom is that everybody has a voice. And it's your job to kind of pull every voice out of those students so they feel important, right? So once you pull all of that ideas out from every single student, they say whatever they say, then it's your job to synthesize. Pull all the ideas together and put it into a form where every student feels like my idea, whatever I stated, is part of that final synthesis, okay? That becomes a little bit tricky on your end, but it's a great skill to have because this is what we do in life, right? We have different experiences. It's our job to kind of synthesize it and make it work for us. And in order for students to really remember what you're teaching them, they have to feel like they're part of the process, okay? So using the divergent thinking activity, you can easily pull them in a discussion forum, and then you can synthesize it and then put it forth to everybody else so that they feel like they're part of the knowledge creation process. Okay. Okay. Now that kind of takes us to the last part of the article, which is Socratic methods. Okay. I'm sure we don't need to go into details about who Socrates was. And basically the ultimate outcome of any teaching relationship is that the student needs to feel like someone listened to me, I'm important, okay? In an online environment, that becomes extremely, extremely important because you don't see people in each other's faces all the time, like in your typical classroom. So the whole concept of I am important and I feel important has to be there in an online environment. Otherwise, the students would disengage and they're not gonna like you and they're not gonna learn anything in the worst case, okay? So how do you get them to feel I am important? This is when you start using questions that are meaningful to them so that you can pull things out, okay? Now, there's also a lot of different skills to work on with that, but the most important part and the fun part is Socratic methods is really, really easy to develop in an online environment. In a live environment, it's almost impossible to develop because you only have a limited amount of time. If you ask the right or wrong question, there's no time for you to analyze how you're asking the questions. In this environment, in the online discussion environment, you can easily say, hey, here's a question I want to pose to the class. And then you can go back on your own and say, was that an open-ended question or was that a closed-ended question? And you can assess yourself after you write this stuff, right? So it's automatic feedback for you to learn how to ask the right type of questions that are engaging, that are open, and sometimes ask the closed-ended questions when you want to guide the class in a certain direction. Okay. The online environment is perfect for that. And then when you're speaking it in the live discussion or a live lecture or something along those lines, then your skills, your brain's already thinking along those lines, and you can always ask the right questions so that the students feel engaged in that process. All right. So any questions on the Socratic methods? Yeah, good. Okay, so we're running a little bit over time. So let me just kind of finish real quick with a very quick high-level overview of what we talked about and how to put all of this into a process. All right, so in the process of planning an online lesson, now this is specific to if you have to do live classes in an online environment, like a virtual classroom, okay? So step one, review the student inventory. Hopefully you've gathered some of that information. If you don't, go do a discussion that pulls all that information into you so that you can use it, right? Review the student inventory, then break down the lesson topics within context of those personal inventories. So whatever you're teaching, make it meaningful for them. Once you can have that pieces of data, then the step three is simply to integrate those pieces, right? Design your 18-minute lectures, design the small parts and pieces. Once you have the lecture part, what information you want them to learn, then you go create the activities to make it more meaningful. And when I look at activities shouldn't be a one-off activity and be done, okay? All the activities can be done in such a way that there's a long time development path for it. So like Elizabeth's example of the classroom, the textbook, what the textbook told you to do. those are very linear pieces, right? But ideally, you want to add meaning to it so that you wrap it around in a system where students get a much more fun and interesting feedback loop as they learn. So you can scaffold their learning step by step, as opposed to here's a class activity, here's another activity, here's another activity. Okay, so, and the same example we use with Michael's example with the interviews, let's build the interviews into something more meaningful and powerful for the students, right? And then they'll learn to love you even more at the end of the day, okay? And then, of course, the last and final step, test and measure, okay? We don't know what we don't know. Everything you teach, be the best student in your classroom. Even though you're the teachers and educators, we should be the best learners, right? So test and measure everything. If you're doing something right, you want to test it and make sure you're going in the right path. If you're doing something wrong, test it. Now, what are some of the tests you can use for yourself? Okay, easily you can see how quickly students are, simple things, like if we're doing an online class, how many students are coming to class on time? If they're really interested in your lectures and your lectures are fun and meaningful for them, more and more will show up on time, right? Simple metrics, okay? When you look at your discussion forums, are students posting on time and early? If you're giving them meaningful feedback, like I always use this to kind of assess what kind of questions I'm asking. If students are posting early, they get a chance to divert or converse their topic with me a lot longer than if students posting late, because the week is almost over, right? So if I'm asking the right questions to make it meaningful for their careers and for their life and for their family, they'll post their discussions a lot quicker, so they have that opportunity to have that conversation in the longer span of time, as opposed to, they don't care, they're disconnected, they'll post in the last very minute. Okay, so those are some ways to kind of start looking at the online environment, how to use it to test and measure how you're doing as a teacher or an educator to make sure the students are learning the most. Okay, so, all right, so what's next? So we're kind of running out of time for questions, but just so you know, we're going to be doing a much more in-depth course on this. So just to help the university communities and other educators. And then if your university has interest, our university can easily partner with your university to develop a specific development program for this kind of content with a lot more depth in each one of these areas. Okay. All right, so I don't want to hold you up any longer. Anybody has questions, feel free to ask. Yeah, Zane, go ahead and unmute yourself.
One question is the 18 minutes. Where's the scientific evidence for that? Where did you get that from?
TED Talks. So there's a link for TED Talk, and there's all the scientific evidence is in that TED Talks. In the article, there's a link for the TED Talks and why 18 minutes. All the data is there.
Having said that, I teach at a high-level university in Japan, one of the better ones, and so I'll be in my third week coming up.
Good.
Is that okay? So third week coming up, and actually I'm doing it exactly the same style as I did it in the physical classroom, and there's no change. So I'm obviously talking a little bit longer than 18 minutes. In the classroom, I think also, like if it's online or offline, so you're saying that in the classroom as well, we should be using 18 minutes, no longer than 18 minutes? Because isn't it the same?
Well, it's a little bit different because in the classroom, they have your full body language, right? And your full body language, it presents a lot more communication information to the students and allows them to engage in a much meaningful way. In a very virtual space like this, all they see is your face, right? They see a very limited amount of body language communication. So in order to keep them engaged, you have to keep it short and meaningful.
Having said that though, Ted, I just felt that there was absolutely zero difference between the online and the offline version for the online classes at the higher level, because they have intrinsic motivation, right? So the thing is, for lower level students, I think even like for my lower level students in the classroom, they can't concentrate more than 5 minutes, like you were saying about the cell phones, right? So I think online won't make any difference, actually. So in my opinion, for that. So yeah. Actually, I had I invited them in for just to get to learn to use Zoom, right? My lower level students, right? And they were goofing off as much as they were in the physical classroom. So, and it was fun. It was fun to do online with them, but it's the same. So there wasn't much of a difference. And I think it's more about the teaching style, like you say, like having perhaps like implementing like project-based teaching approaches or content-based instruction, and you know, getting out of the textbook. I think that's just like general, how would you say, my approach to teaching follows that methodology, right? So I don't think that I'm doing anything different. Yeah.
So Zane, we can't look at one simple intervention and say it's going to change everything, right? It has to be a complete package and design of how education is delivered. Okay, all the 5 keys, if you take just do one of those things, it will change maybe very little. But if you do a combination of the different things we talked about, and as we talked about in this workshop, there's a lot of things that are very much integrated to each other. You can't just change one little thing. So the 18-minute is not just one simple function, but how you teach, your body language, the meaning behind it. There's so many different aspects to make it fun and interesting for the students at whatever topic and whatever grade you're working with.
So I think, Ted, that the main point is making it meaningful for the students. And if you don't do that, I mean, that you're going to lose their they're going to lose their motivation, right? So it's got to be the key.
Yep. Yeah. Emotion is the huge key to all of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Offline. I mean, I have been doing a blended approach to teaching for years now. So for me, I picked a few things up from your talk today. It was very interesting for me, but you know, yeah. But I think that giving the meaning is for me the most important thing, I think.
Okay. Great. All right. Thank you. Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, this 18-minute thing, how do you view that when you have like a 90-minute class time? Do you know, like in a normal class situation, I'll switch activities, and I assume we have to do the same online. But like for me right now, I'm just starting to learn this technology and wondering how, and it, you know, I feel like I've got one or both hands tied behind my back, just technically, right? So it's like, how do you kind of see filling a 90-minute time when we know that there's this 18-minute kind of limit? I mean, you want to be changing the activities or somehow every 18 minutes or something like that, right? Or what do you anyway, I wonder if you could talk about that.
Sure. In a 19-minute section, I would do most at 3 segments of 18 minutes. The rest of the time is different activities. Okay. So
you mean when you say when you're talking about 18 minutes, that's time you're talking?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So like in a normal class, I don't actually, I might teach that much in total, and then having them doing things, maybe doing more activities. So anyway, as like a language teacher, how can I get, you know, I assume there must be ways to pair people up, for example, or, you know, maybe Zane knows how to do this, or but I mean, like, how do I do, like, normally I do like a, you know, pair up and talk for a few minutes and then change partners, do it again. So looks like Zane's got some tips.
Yeah, just one thing for you, Ted. Perhaps you can put us into a breakout room and give us a 5-minute discussion on a summary of today's lesson. Have us do that and we'll come back. Can you do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So then Robert will get the idea.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know, which technology are you using in your classroom, Robert?
Well, so far, like, I'll be using Google Classrooms and Microsoft Teams.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So both of those technologies have breakout rooms, and you can create small groups. You know, other things you can do besides the groups, like you see the board that I just put on there, right? So you can have people draw different colors and different boards, and then invite other people to draw on a whiteboard, just as they would come up on the board and draw their solutions. right? You can easily split the board into multiple segments, and then have people one group draw on here, one people draw on here, and so on, right? The whiteboard's another useful tool to do with the students. So everybody can participate. You know, you're not limited to bodies on a blackboard. Now everybody can draw on the board, right? So
Okay.
there's a lot of different things you can play around with.
So the 18-minute rule, that's like for one activity or for your speaking time, or?
For your speaking time.
Okay, yeah.
Ted, can I also, to Robert's point, I used to teach a course or at a university where they had 4-hour courses once a week. And so they were extremely long. So I would break things up into small segments. So, you know, I may speak for a while, and then I would put on a quick video, and then we would break into groups and talk about the video. And then we would come back and I would have the groups present out. And so you just keep breaking things up. And so it just keeps things from kind of getting monotonous, you know, and just kind of getting old. And it helped to keep the flow of the class going. But I was doing very little talking when you added it all up at the end of the class. But the students were doing a ton of talking, either to one another or reporting out to the entire group. And then I would also use videos quite a bit as well, so we could chat about that. And so I don't know if that is similar to the model that you're talking about as well, Ted, if that fits that approach.
Yep, definitely.
Also, Ted, I was going to ask, what are your thoughts on applied research projects? Do you think that that fits the model that you're speaking about here as well?
It depends on the topic and depends on the student's interests. So as long as they're aligned, I mean, applied research is one specific methodology, right? As long as the emotional content is connected to it from a student's perspective, it'll be meaningful for them. If it's not meaningful, like, you know, as educators, we hate grading papers, you know, 50 papers on the same topic. You know, go research about Walmart or whatever company, and we hate that, right? But it's what we're supposed to do, but I never choose to do it. But, you know, make it fun for them so that it's meaningful. Whatever they apply research, apply it in the research area of their interest.
Right. So like, for instance, I mean, taking a concept from class and applying it to their job, or doing a specific research project on their job, or working on a solution for their job, something like that, and writing up a report on that, or action research, that sort of deal.
Yeah, and you know, it doesn't have to be with their jobs. It could be with their friends, you know, how they gain popularity amongst their friends, how they can get more friends on Facebook, or, you know, whatever social media they're using, right? Or it could be with their families, how they're building a better relationship with their mothers and fathers or siblings, right? All those things can be applied research in that way.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending.
Thanks, Ted.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks so much, Ted. Tremendous.
Thanks, Ted.
Thank you very
Appreciate it.
much.
Very helpful.
All right, thank you. All right,
That was
bye-bye.
excellent.
See everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Just
Bye-bye.
one thing. So if anybody is interested in learning how to use Zoom, I run a teachers teaching teachers how to use Zoom. They're basically based in Tokyo, but you're welcome to join our group if you like. So, and we have been like 3 weeks ago, I didn't know what Zoom was. So now actually what we do is we take turns as a teacher and as a student. So the teachers have their own style of teaching. They do it through Zoom, and the other participants act as students, and then they take part in the learning process. And then we have a quick Q&A at the end of each one, and we take turns doing that. So we're up to our 5th one or 6th one at the moment, and it's been a huge help, which is probably why the online teacher for me started at Tokyo University of Foreign Studies like 2 weeks ago. That's probably why it's gone as smoothly as it has. It went really smoothly. That's probably a huge thing to do with it. So I think that you're teaching online, you really have to get to know the system inside out as soon as possible. Otherwise, you're going to look like an idiot when you come to the class.
Zane, how do we join? Zane, thank you. How do we join?
I'll put into the chat, I'll put my email, and just give me an email, yeah?
Great, mate. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's made a huge difference. And a bunch of it's a good group, awesome guys. And as I say, so here we go. So there you go.
Okay, Zane. Ritchie.
Got it. Thanks a
I think
lot.
it's really
I got
important to learn the tools, you know, you're using. There's a huge,
Yeah.
there's a lot you can do on Zoom. And like Ted, you were mentioning that using the polls, right? Have you used the polls in Zoom, Ted?
No, I've only used it in Collaborate and some of the other
Okay,
tools.
so it's actually a polling function. So during your lecture, for example, today, Ted, you could have brought up well, you make it in advance, but you can bring a poll up from periodically, right, to see if we're concentrating. We can all put our answers right. It comes in real time, you know. So there's a lot you can do like that. So
Yeah.
So, but,
And-
you know, if anyone's
also-
interested, just contact me.
Yeah, the beauty of Zoom has a lot of different lectures on how to use all its functions.
Yeah.
So I signed up Zoom like, a couple years ago, and every month there's keep on sending me information and here's how you do Zoom. Here's another feature. They keep on adding features like Zane's little background and stuff. Zoom does a really good job in communicating with its users. So just sign up on Zoom and they'll keep sending you a lot of their talks on this stuff too.
I just feel that the best way of learning is actually experience and hands-on learning, right? So
Yeah.
rather than, you can watch all the video tutorials, but some of us are not
Oh, yeah.
tech savvy. So if you're not tech savvy, you'll never get it, right? So you're actually practicing it and having people come and act as students and you being the instructor and taking turns doing that will make a huge difference actually.
Yeah,
That's awesome. Thanks, Zane. Thanks, guys.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Yeah,
Take
bye-bye.
care.
Thank you. Thanks, Ted. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.